Imagine rising from the shadows of the palace, from the status of a low-ranking concubine, overlooked and underestimated, to become the most powerful person in one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. All of this in a world where women were not even permitted to hold power, let alone rule as emperor. This is not fiction. This is the astonishing true story of Wu Zetian, the only woman in more than 3,000 years of imperial China to ascend the dragon throne and claim the title of emperor in her own right. Born in the 7th century, Wu was expected to live a life of quiet servitude in the harem of Emperor Taizong. But she was never meant to be silent. With unmatched intelligence, political cunning, and an unshakable will, Wu navigated the treacherous court politics of the Tang dynasty, outmaneuvering consorts, ministers, and even emperors. She has been called many names: a poisoner, a seductress, a schemer, even a tyrant. But was Wu Zetian truly a heartless killer who crushed her enemies without mercy? Or was she a visionary who wielded every tool available to her in a male-dominated world that gave her no room for error? Wu's reign was not merely a story of power grabbed in blood and silk. It was also a time of reform, education, and religious tolerance. She elevated the role of Buddhism, promoted talented individuals regardless of their family backgrounds, and laid the foundations for a stronger centralized state. To some, she was a dragon in human form. To others, a feminist icon centuries ahead of her time. History remembers her through the eyes of the men she threatened. Now, it's time to look again. It's the 7th century in China. The Tang dynasty is booming, rich in poetry, painting, cosmopolitan trade, and powerful bureaucratic systems. But for all its enlightenment, it clings tightly to a core belief. Women may serve behind the throne, but never sit upon it. Enter Wu Zhao, born in 624 AD in Wenshui. She was not of royal blood, but her family held a respected place in the literati class. Educated, influential, and politically connected, from an early age, Wu was trained in literature, calligraphy, and classical philosophy. Rare privileges for a girl. She read not just to pass the time, but to understand the architecture of power. At 14, she was sent to the imperial court as a Chiron, one of the lowest-ranking concubines of Emperor Taizong, a man she would serve and study. In the grand halls of Chang'an, surrounded by glittering scholars and generals, Wu was a quiet presence, not favored, not feared, not noticed, but Wu was not like the others. She listened when ministers debated policy. She memorized the protocols of court life. She watched how decisions were made, how alliances were broken, how lives would be elevated or destroyed with a single whisper. While others chased favor through beauty or submission, Wu cultivated something far more dangerous: understanding. When Emperor Taizong died in 649, most concubines without children were expected to retire to a Buddhist convent. Wu went, but her story didn't end there. Instead, her path took a turn that would reshape Chinese history. There, in the cloistered calm of monastic life, she reconnected with the new emperor, Gaozong, Taizong's son. She had once caught his eye in the palace, and now he brought her back into court. A controversial move, scandalous even by Tang standards. But Wu Zhao returned not as a concubine. She returned as a contender. She bore him sons. She maneuvered her rivals into disgrace. She ousted the empress herself, allegedly framing her for the death of Wu's own infant daughter, a bold and brutal move that sent shockwaves through the palace. By 655, Wu Zhao had done the unthinkable. She became Empress Consort China, but she was far from done. In the years that followed, as Gaozong's health declined, Wu began to rule in his name, issuing edicts, presiding over audiences, and reshaping court politics. Ministers who opposed her were demoted, exiled, or eliminated. Those who supported her were elevated, often from humble backgrounds, a radical break from aristocratic tradition. And when Gaozong died, she didn't step aside. She ruled as Empress Dowager, then as regent, and finally, in 690, she declared a new dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, proclaiming herself Huangdi, the Emperor of China. For the first and only time in Chinese history, a woman ruled in her own name, not as a puppet, not as a regent, but as the dragon enthroned. When Emperor Taizong died, Wu, like all concubines without children, was expected to retire quietly into a life of devotion at a Buddhist convent, out of sight, out of power. But Wu Zhao had no intention of fading into silence. She caught the attention of the new emperor, Gaozong, Taizong's son, and possibly her former admirer. Their rekindled connection was scandalous, even by imperial standards. It was taboo for a new emperor to take his father's concubine, but Gaozong defied tradition. He brought Wu back to the palace, not as a servant of the past, but as his concubine. Yes, you heard that right. The former consort of the late emperor became the lover of his heir. It was a move that shocked the court, but it was only the beginning. What followed reads like a palace thriller drenched in silken blood. Wu gave birth to a baby girl. But tragedy struck. The infant mysteriously died in her cradle. Court whispers blamed illness, but Wu saw an opportunity. She publicly accused Empress Wang, Gaozong's official wife, of murdering the child out of jealousy. Gaozong, grieving and confused, believed her. In a dramatic turn, Empress Wang was stripped of her title and imprisoned, along with consort Xiao, another rival. Later, both women were reportedly executed on Wu's orders, their hands and feet cut off, their corpses thrown into vats of wine. A warning to all. With her enemies crushed, Wu ascended to the highest female position in the land, Empress of China. But Wu was never content with power that depended on a man. Behind the throne, she began to outshine and overshadow Gaozong himself. He suffered from chronic illness, migraines, and strokes, and as he weakened, Wu stepped in. At first, she merely advised. Then she made decisions in his name. Eventually, ministers addressed her directly, bypassing the emperor entirely. She created a parallel bureaucracy, filled with loyal officials who owed their rise not to lineage, but to her patronage. She became the power behind the throne. And she was just getting started. Each threat that emerged was swiftly, often brutally, neutralized. Brothers-in-law, nephews, princes, ministers. No one was safe if they questioned her authority. She established a vast network of secret police, who monitored dissent and eliminated rivals. Her rule was marked by paranoia and precision. By the time Gaozong died in 683, the empire already knew Wu was in charge. She ruled first through her sons, puppet emperors whom she installed and removed like chess pieces. And in 690, she made the ultimate move. She abolished the Tang dynasty itself, declared a new Zhou dynasty, and crowned herself Huangdi, the one and only female emperor in all of Chinese history. Not empress, not regent, emperor. She rewrote what was possible for women, for rulers, for dynasties. And yet, history branded her a monster. But ask yourself, was she truly crueler than the emperors before her? Or was she simply playing the same game better? Rumors swirled to the gilded halls of the Tang court, of poisoned teacups, midnight executions, and whispered names that vanished by dawn. They said Wu Zetian ruled with an iron will wrapped in silk, that she employed secret police, forged documents, used spies in the ministries, and set elaborate traps to catch disloyalty before it bloomed. That her enemies didn't just lose influence, they lost their lives. High-ranking officials, exiled, tortured, beheaded. Royal family members who posed a threat, removed, some permanently. Even her own eldest son, the crown prince, was allegedly driven to suicide after he crossed her. Her critics, led by Confucian scholars, steeped in doctrines that declared a woman's place was beneath a man, recoiled in horror. They portrayed Wu as unnatural, a usurper, a witch, a murderess, the embodiment of chaos itself. For centuries, history books written by men would repeat these labels: cruel, deceitful, tyrannical, But here's the uncomfortable truth. Wu didn't break the rules of imperial power. She followed them to perfection. For generations, male emperors had climbed the throne over the bodies of brothers, uncles, and rivals. Intrigue, assassination, coups. These were standard tools of statecraft. Wu simply mastered the same brutal game, but she did it as a woman, and that made her dangerous in a way the world had never seen before. And despite the blood on her hands, she wasn't just a tyrant. She was also a reformer. Wu Zetian opened civil service exams to commoners, allowing talent, not just aristocracy, to rise. She elevated the status of women in court, encouraging female scholars, and expanding the influence of the Empress's office. She supported Buddhism over Confucianism, promoting temples, art, and literature that gave voice to a different spiritual path, one that revered female figures like the Bodhisattva Guanyin. Under her rule, China thrived, with agricultural reforms, military strength, and a stable, centralized government. Foreign ambassadors arrived from as far away as Central Asia, the Middle East, and even the Roman remnants, marveling at the prosperity of her court. She ruled for 15 years as emperor, and decades more from behind the throne. Not as a consort, not as a puppet, but as the singular sovereign of the world's largest empire. And yet, when she finally died in 705, her tomb was marked with a blank stone, no name, no epitaph. The final insult from a world unwilling to write her story. But the silence didn't last. Today, historians ask a different question. Was Wu Zetian truly a monster, or simply a woman who refused to apologize for her power? Did Wu Zetian really poison her way to power? Did she truly murder rivals, eliminate her own children, and run a shadow empire of spies and assassins? Some sources say yes. Ancient chronicles claim she poisoned Empress Wang and Consort Xiao, the two women who once stood between her and the imperial crown. Others say she orchestrated the deaths of her sons, including the crown prince Li Hong and later Li Xian, both removed from succession under murky circumstances. Secret police? Allegedly everywhere. Torture? Used to silence dissent. But here's the catch. Most of these stories come from Confucian scholars, the same men who believed that a woman on the throne was an affront to cosmic order. In their worldview, a woman ruling the empire wasn't just unconventional. It was a sign that the mandate of heaven had been disturbed. To them, Wu wasn't a sovereign. She was a calamity in human form. So they wrote her story accordingly. They painted her not just as powerful, but as monstrous, the archetype of female ambition gone mad. Over time, these accounts hardened into legend. The Dragon Lady, the femme fatale who clawed her way to the top with poison, lies, and cruelty. But modern historians are pushing back. Today's scholars argue that many of these grisly tales were likely exaggerated or even fabricated. The infanticide of her own daughter? There's no direct evidence. The narrative that she manipulated Gaozong through seduction alone? Deeply reductionist. Even her so-called reign of terror has to be weighed against the standard practices of Tangera court politics, which were brutal by design, regardless of who wore the crown. The truth is, Wu was ruthless, but she was no anomaly. She didn't invent court intrigue. She just mastered it in a system where mercy was weakness and survival required steel nerves and sharper instincts. Ask yourself this. If a man had taken the same path, silencing enemies, consolidating power, ruling with efficiency, would we still call him a monster? Or would we call him a strong emperor? In fact, we already have. Countless emperors before and after Wu slaughtered siblings, executed ministers, and buried rivals alive, and were still remembered as wise, heroic, even divine. Wu was held to a different standard, because she was different. She broke the ultimate taboo, not by being cruel, but by being female and unapologetically powerful. And yet, she didn't just survive in that world. She ruled it. So was she a villain, or simply history's most In 705, after decades of wielding supreme power, Wu Zetian was forced to abdicate. Old, ill, and politically vulnerable, she was surrounded by ambitious ministers and restless princes who had waited years, even decades, for her downfall, under pressure from within the palace. She relinquished the throne to her son and retreated into seclusion. She died soon after, at the age of 81, marking the end of one of the most extraordinary lives in world history. But what she left behind was anything but ordinary. She was the only female emperor in more than 3 millennia of imperial China. Not a regent, not an empress dowager, an emperor with her own dynasty, her own reign era, her own mandate from heaven. And she wasn't just a symbol, she was a state builder. Under Wu Zetian, China's civil service exam system expanded, giving more people, especially from non-noble families, a chance at government office based on merit, not bloodline. She promoted scholars, administrators, and military leaders based on ability, not aristocratic pedigree. This reshaping of the bureaucracy strengthened the empire and planted seeds that would flourish long after her reign. She elevated Buddhism, sponsoring monumental statues, temples, and texts in the image of the Bodhisattva Guanyin. Compassionate yet powerful, Wu found a divine model for rulership that rivaled Confucian orthodoxy and legitimized her unique position as a female sovereign. Yet for all her accomplishments, her memory was wrapped in controversy. To some, she was the woman who defied heaven, who dared to claim what was never meant to be hers. To others, she was a visionary, a proto-feminist, a ruler who played by the empire's rules and beat the men at their own game. Her tombstone tells a final tale, or rather, it doesn't. Buried at the Qianling Mausoleum beside her husband, Emperor Gaozong, her epitaph is deliberately left blank. No praises, no condemnation, just stone and silence. Some say it was her enemy's final insult, an attempt to erase her narrative. Others say it was her final act of power, to let history itself decide who she truly was. Centuries later, the judgment is still being written. So, was Wu Zetian a poisoner? A power-hungry tyrant who clawed her way to the throne over corpses and scandal? Or was she a visionary reformer, a ruler who shattered the ceiling of gender and tradition, ushering in a stronger, more meritocratic empire? Maybe she was all three, because history isn't a morality tale. It's a battlefield of competing narratives, and Wu Zetian lived in the heart of that war. She ruled a world that told her she couldn't lead, couldn't govern, couldn't survive without a man behind her. But she didn't just survive, she reigned, issuing edicts commanding armies, reforming the bureaucracy, and reshaping the very idea of what leadership could look like. She rose through strategy, not softness. She wielded intelligence like a blade, and when necessary, she did what male emperors had done for centuries, whatever it took. Yet still, history can't quite decide what to make of her. To some, she remains a dragon empress, a cautionary tale of female ambition unbound. To others, she's a pioneer, a figure who bent the arc of possibility just far enough to let a woman grasp the throne. She ruled for half a century, longer than many emperors whose names are praised in golden ink. But even now, over 1,300 years later, we're still debating. Was she cruel? Was she brilliant? Was she wrong for wanting more? Or are we just uncomfortable with a woman who refused to apologize for her power? Her story isn't neat. It doesn't end with redemption or ruin. It ends with a blank tombstone and a question mark still echoing across dynasties. Wu Zetian didn't wait for permission. She wrote her own place in history and left it to us to understand what that means.